Tonight, we look down, not at the heroes or the headlines, but at the silent, powerful foundation they rest upon: concrete. Concrete isn't just a material, it is the unseen skeleton of the American dream. It's the highway, the dam, the skyscraper, literally the ground beneath our feet that transformed a continental wilderness into a modern, networked superpower. This is the history of how a simple blend of rock and water became the concrete veins of a nation, silently dictating where we live and how we travel. So, dim the lights, let the hum of your room settle, and let the rhythmic, steady pace of this forgotten history bring you into a deep, restful sleep. Let's dig into the dust and discover the foundation of modern life. 1898. The American landscape, stretching from the settled eastern coast to the rugged, recently subdued west, was connected not by concrete, but by earth. These were the old dirt tracks, simple ribbons of compacted soil and dust, carved by decades of wagon wheels, horses' hooves, and the deliberate, unhurried pace of human travel. They possessed a character that pavement would ultimately erase, a responsiveness to the seasons, a memory of every passing storm, and a quiet intimacy with the land they crossed. In the small, slow-paced town of Fairview, Missouri, lived Silas Finch. Silas wasn't a farmer, nor was he a railroad man. He was a rural postmaster and, unofficially, the caretaker of the main track that wound its way north toward the state capital. Silas was a man built for the slow rhythm of the dirt track. His movements were deliberate, his voice a gentle rumble, and his hands, though strong, were never hurried. He represented the America before the rush. Every morning, just as the first sliver of sunlight broke over the Ozark Hills, Silas would walk a 2-mile stretch of the track. His job wasn't mandated, it was a ritual. He carried a heavy canvas satchel for the mail and a long-handled shovel for the road. A road is like an old story, Silas, his grandfather, who had first carved that track with an ox-drawn plough, had once told him. If you don't smooth out the rough patches, folks stop listening. On this particular morning, the air was crisp, scented with pine and the residual dampness of an autumn rain. The track, usually a pale, dusty beige, was now a deep chocolate brown, perfect for recording history. Silas observed the indentations, the sharp, defined tread of a passing bicycle, a rare sight, signaling the slow creep of modernity, the deeper ruts of a lumber wagon, and the delicate print of a child's boot. He noted a particularly deep rut near Miller's Creek, a spot where the rain had pooled. He paused, leaning on his shovel. The rut was a danger, a potential axle breaker for the heavy stagecoach that would pass later that day carrying passengers and important documents. He knelt, scooping handfuls of loose, dry gravel from his satchel, not the mail one, but a separate tool bag, and filling the depression, tamping it down with the back of his shovel. As he worked, a distant, unfamiliar sound broke the morning stillness, a quick, aggressive put-put-put. Silas looked up, shading his eyes. Approaching from the north was not a horse, but a gleaming, bright red contraption that moved under its own power. It was an automobile. These horseless carriages were still novelties, expensive toys of the urban rich, rarely seen so deep in the heartland. The car was driven by a young, impatient man in goggles and a driving cap, sitting beside a woman whose wide-brimmed hat looked absurdly out of place. The driver seemed less interested in the scenery and more interested in speed. He hit the rut near Miller's Creek that Silas had just patched. The patch held, but the sudden jolt caused the driver to swerve slightly. He slammed on the brakes, sending a plume of gravel and dust high into the air, completely obliterating the serene atmosphere. The driver, pulling off his goggles, leaned out, his face flushed with annoyance. "Hey, what are you doing? You've ruined my clearance," he yelled, gesturing at the dirt now coating his polished machine. Silas straightened up, his shovel firm in the earth. "Morning, sir. I was simply making sure your wheels wouldn't break your axle on that soft spot. This is the stage track, and we keep it safe for all kinds of traffic." The driver scoffed. "Safe? This is the 20th century. We need proper pavement. Roads built for speed and efficiency, not for some horse-drawn relic. You're putting gravel on a highway, old man." "It's a dirt track, sir," Silas replied gently. "And it's built for connection, not just speed. You rush a dirt track, it rushes back." The driver, muttering about backward locals, restarted his engine and sped off, the put-put-put quickly fading into the distance. Silas watched the dust settle. He picked up his shovel, feeling the weight of the moment. The automobile represented the rush, the relentless urge to go faster, to flatten the landscape, to demand that the earth yield to the machine. But Silas knew the dirt track. It demanded patience. It demanded respect. And that was the core of his historical story. The quiet dignity of the old roads and the people whose lives moved at their speed. He had a letter to deliver to the Johnson farm, a letter that had traveled over 3 states, and it wouldn't mind waiting 5 more minutes. 1827. The great undertaking was complete. 4 years after its official opening, the Erie Canal, Clinton's ditch, the impossible ribbon of water stretching 363 miles from the Hudson River to Lake Erie, had settled into its rhythm. It was a rhythm of quiet, immense industry, a profound contrast to the boisterous energy of the cities it served. The canal did not roar. It slumbered, moving the commerce of a nascent nation with the steady, slow grace of a glacier. Our story is centered on Lock Number 31, a tranquil nexus near the town of Palmyra, New York. Here resided Mr. Silas Thorne, a different Silas from the previous chapter, the lock master. Silas was a man whose life mirrored the canal itself, calm, meticulous, and essential. His work was about control, not speed, a perfect antidote to the chaotic, untamed nature of American expansion. Silas's routine began before dawn. He lived in a small, sturdy stone house beside the lock. The morning air was usually thick with the smell of wet earth, wood smoke, and the faint, earthy scent of the canal water. His tools were simple: massive wooden levers, thick ropes, and a keen eye for the depth and flow. His daily rhythm was dictated by the soft, mournful call of a bugle, the traditional signal of an approaching packet boat or line boat. On a particular midsummer morning, the bugle call came early, a lingering sound that drifted over the water. Silas walked out onto the stone platform of the lock, readying the levers. The lock was an ingenious mechanism, a stone chamber designed to gently lift or lower a boat from one elevation to the next, conquering the 500-foot difference between the Hudson and Lake Erie. The approaching vessel was the Western Star, a freight line boat specializing in carrying New York goods westward. At the helm was Captain Elspeth Vance, a formidable woman in a man's world. Elspeth was one of the few women captains on the canal, having taken over the boat after her husband died. She was practical, weathered, and knew the 363 miles of the canal with the intimacy of a farmer knows his own fields. The Western Star was pulled by a team of 3 weary mules walking the towpath, their bells jingling a sleepy, hypnotic tune. The boat itself was a long, low slab, heavily laden with barrels of salted cod, bolts of Manchester fabric, and crates of sophisticated farm machinery destined for the settlers of Ohio and Michigan. As the boat eased into the lock chamber, guided by the measured steps of the mule driver, Elspeth stood at the tiller, her hands steady. "Morning, Silas. Got a full hold today. Seems all of New York is sending their best west," Elspeth called out, her voice a low contralto that carried easily across the water. "Morning, Captain Vance. And the West is sending its demands." "I see," Silas replied, his eyes scanning the water level. He signaled his young apprentice, Tommy, who began slowly turning the massive wooden wheel that controlled the sluice gates. The process of locking through was an exercise in patience. It took 10 to 15 minutes of quiet, measured effort. The water level inside the chamber began to drop, an almost imperceptible descent. The boat, held steady by Elspeth and the crew, descended with it. It was during this gentle descent that the true nature of the canal's commerce became apparent. The noise of the world, the crashing waves of the Atlantic, the roaring machinery of the mills was absent. Instead, there was the low whoosh of escaping water, the creak of the boat's timbers, and the distant rhythmic clip-clop of the resting mules on the towpath. This quiet was the engine of commerce. Every minute of that descent represented tons of goods moving cheaper, faster, and more reliably than ever before. New York City was being quietly fed by the vast bounty of the Great Lakes. The nation's interior was being quietly supplied with the manufactured luxuries of the East. Suddenly, a disturbance. A young passenger on the deck of the Western Star, a bustling, overdressed man on his way to Rochester to establish a bank, grew impatient. "Master Thorne, can't you make the water run faster? Time is money, sir. We're losing valuable minutes," he shouted, pacing the deck. Silas, without turning, paused the wheel momentarily. "Sir," he said, his voice carrying the authority of quiet command, "the canal operates at the speed of water, not the speed of man's ambition. We rush the process, and we risk structural damage. The goal, sir, is not to save a minute, but to guarantee the passage of your assets for the next 100 years." Elspeth nodded approvingly. The young man subsided, forced into the quiet contemplation the canal demanded. As the lock reached the lower level, Silas slowly cranked the main gate open. Elspeth steered the Western Star out, back onto the steady flow of the channel. "Safe passage, Captain," Silas said, tipping his cap. "And a peaceful day, Silas," she replied. As the boat disappeared around the bend, 1867. The American West was a landscape of colossal indifference. It demanded toil, sacrifice, and a kind of profound rhythmic patience. Across this vast silent expanse, 2 great efforts were meeting. The Union Pacific driving west from Omaha, and the Central Pacific battling east from Sacramento. This was not a swift, celebratory march, but a daily, grueling imposition of order upon chaos. It was the sound of the iron horse's lullaby, the steady thud-thud of spikes being hammered into ties, a somnolent, relentless rhythm of progress. Our protagonist is Jude Callahan, a Gandhi dancer, a track worker for the Union Pacific. Jude was not an engineer or a financier. He was a man defined by the mile of track he and his gang laid each month. Originally an immigrant from Ireland, he had traded the famine of his home for the back-breaking hunger of the Great Plains. his life was stripped down to four things: his hammer, his pay, his dreams of land, and the rhythm of the track. Jude's team was deep in the Wyoming Territory, a place of endless sagebrush, glaring sun, and silence so profound it pressed against the eardrums. Every morning, before the heat shimmered off the rails, the process began. Rails out, ties set, spikes ready. The calls were quick, clipped, almost automatic, delivered by the foreman, a stern, wiry man named Mr. O'Connell. Jude's job was critical, laying the heavy 500-pound iron rails onto the wooden ties. He worked alongside Li Wei, a quiet man from Guangdong who had joined the Central Pacific Forces, but was temporarily loaned to the Union Pacific due to a shortage of workers in this brutal stretch. The two men, separated by language and culture, were united by the weight of the iron they carried. They didn't speak. They communicated in the shared language of effort. How? Li Wei would grunt, signaling the moment to lift. Heave! Jude would respond, and the rail would be thrown into place with a controlled clang. Then came the lullaby. The spikes, nearly a foot long, had to be driven home. 4 men to a rail, hammers rising and falling in perfect, hypnotizing synchronization. Thud, 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 thud. It was a song of exhaustion, a mesmerizing rhythm designed to keep the mind focused on the small, critical task and away from the vastness of the empty plains. On this particular day, the heat was suffocating and the crew was tired. They had laid nearly 2 miles already. As Jude struck a spike, his hammer missed the head, grazing his thumb. He cursed, shaking his hand, pulling himself out of the trance-like rhythm. Mr. O'Connell immediately stepped over, not with sympathy, but with a warning. Eyes on the spike, Callahan. The rhythm is all we have out here. You break the rhythm, you break the line, and the line is the country's heartbeat. O'Connell was right. The silence of the plains was not restful. It was menacing. The rhythm was a shield against the endless land, against the isolation, and against the fatigue. Jude watched as Li Wei simply picked up the slack, his hammer never pausing, his face expressionless beneath his conical hat. Later, during the meager noon rest under the shadow of a water tower, Jude approached Li Wei, offering him a piece of hardtack bread. Li Wei accepted with a slight bow. He spoke in broken English, his voice soft, a surprising contrast to his powerful build. The iron, heavy, but the song, it make time short. The lullaby? Jude asked, nodding toward the newly laid track. Li Wei smiled, pointing to the rail line stretching east. Home, song of the iron horse. One day, no more walk. Sleep and arrive. Li Wei's words encapsulated the core promise of the railroad. The eventual ability to sleep through the journey, conquering the vast, lonely distances that had tormented generations of pioneers. The work was brutal, but the dream it built was one of quiet, efficient connection. As they rested, a solitary figure rode up on a dusty horse. A surveyor, Mr. Davies, bringing the new coordinates. He pointed to the jagged, imposing outline of the promontory summit in the distance. The Central Pacific crews were only a few dozen miles away. They're coming fast, boys. They hit the Wasatch a week ago. This is the final push. We lay 10 miles tomorrow, or we lose the finish line to the Chinese. Davies shouted, excitement overriding exhaustion. 1,888. New York City was a symphony of chaos, but at night it was a city of shadows, smells, and flickering gaslight. The promise of Edison's electric light was a palpable, thrilling hum beneath the surface. Yet the reality, was a dense, bewildering tangle of wires, poles, and competing currents. The task was not a single, grand switch-flipping moment. It was a methodical, dangerous job of building the first great grids, lighting the cities, one wire at a time. Our protagonist is Daniel Dan Sullivan, a young lineman working for one of Thomas Edison's primary contracting companies. Dan was an aerial artist of the developing city, spending his days perched 50 feet above the chaotic streets. His office was the crossbar of a utility pole. His tools were gloves, pliers, and an unshakable nerve. His job was the most visible, and yet the most often ignored, weaving the invisible web of power that would change the world while everyone else slept. The work was defined by its contrast, the breathtaking view of the city's potential against the grubby, lethal reality of the wires. On a chilly November morning, Dan and his partner, Old Man Fitz, were tasked with connecting a newly built substation near Pearl Street, the heart of the first true grid, to a block of burgeoning theatres. "Mind your step, Danny," Fitz mumbled, his voice gravelly from years of breathing coal smoke and cold air. Fitz was a veteran of the telegraph lines and the early, unreliable arc lighting systems. He was cynical, but meticulous. "It ain't the wind that'll kill you up here. It's the ignorance." The poles were a nightmare. Before electrification, every company, telegraph, telephone, fire alarm, and gaslight regulators, strung its own cables. Now, the electric wires were added to the dense black canopy, crossing and crisscrossing in a perilous, untamed spaghetti of copper. Dan ascended the pole with practiced ease, his heavy boots finding purchase on the iron steps. The air was clearer up here, and the noise of carriage traffic and street vendors faded into a dull roar. He carefully threaded a new, thick copper wire designed for direct current DC along the crossbar, working around a nest of old telephone lines that hummed with quiet, innocuous static. "Measure twice, connect once," Fitz called up, echoing the mantra of their trade. The danger was constant. Unlike the low-voltage telephone lines, these wires were meant to carry a current powerful enough to light a building and stop a heart. The rivalry between Edison's DC system and Westinghouse's newer alternating current AC was often settled not in the courtroom, but on the pole. Competitors sometimes strung their hot AC lines perilously close to the DC circuits, leading to deadly, unexpected arcs of electricity. Suddenly, a sharp crackle cut through the air. A nearby, unsanctioned arclight wire, owned by a fly-by-night company, had frayed and was slapping gently against the pole. A small blue spark danced ominously. "That's the black current, Danny. Keep clear!" Fitz yelled, his voice sharp with alarm. Dan froze, his hand inches from where he needed to clamp the new DC line. He had to work around the death trap. He pulled a thick piece of rubber sheeting from his tool belt, a crude but essential insulator, and draped it carefully over the arc wire, muffling the deadly spark. The work demanded patience. He couldn't rush the twist, the splice, or the tape. Each connection had to be perfect, sealed against the damp, the wind, and the inevitable swaying of the pole. The transformation of New York from gaslight to electric light was happening connection by connection, by the quiet, steady dedication of men like Dan, who understood the power they were harnessing. As he finally clamped the new wire and secured the insulation, a window opened in the theatre below. An elderly woman, the cleaning matron, peered out, her face framed by the yellow, gaslit glow of the interior. She didn't look up at the danger, only at the steady, dull yellow light she was used to. She had no idea that Dan was meticulously weaving the unseen grid that would soon banish her shadows forever. Dan finished his splice, securing the wire. He descended, the scent of fresh copper and ozone following him. The city below was still dark, loud and messy, but the silent web of power was growing, one wire at a time. It was slow, hard work, but tonight, the theatres on this street would experience a brilliant sudden dawn, courtesy of the invisible effort of 2 linemen and a few yards of copper. 1914. The vast, open factory floor of the Ford Highland Park plant in Detroit was not just a workplace. It was an altar to efficiency. It was a place where human effort was reduced to a measurable unit of time and motion, and where the product, the ubiquitous Model T, was built at a rate that defied nature. The sound was not chaotic. It was a vast, humming, hypnotic sound. The Ford factory's rhythm, the insistent, steady beat of standardization, and the new American pace. Our protagonist is Elias Eli Marek, a Polish immigrant who had left the slow agricultural life of his old world for the promise of the new. Eli wasn't interested in the grand philosophy of Henry Ford. He was interested in the legendary $5 day, the wage that doubled the industry standard and promised economic salvation. His job was simple, relentless, and critical, securing the left rear wheel bolt to the chassis. Every minute, the line delivered a new chassis. Every minute, Eli had to secure the bolt. The environment was a study in cold industrial order. The enormous plant was clean, bright, lit by those very electric grids from the previous chapter, and dominated by the slow, inexorable crawl of the assembly line, a continuous, powered belt running through the middle of the floor. Eli stood at his station, his hands moving with the precision of a clock mechanism. Click, 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 turn, 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 clamp. The first hour was a challenge. The second was exhausting. By the third, the action became unconscious, a part of the greater mechanical pulse of the building. The constant, repetitive movement demanded that Eli surrender his mind to the machine. He had to become a function of the rhythm. "Don't look at the clock, Marek," advised Gus, the older foreman, whose face was perpetually covered in a fine layer of oil and fatigue. "Look at the belt. The belt don't slow down, and neither can you." The silence within the rhythm was the most profound aspect. The thousands of men on the floor rarely spoke. There was no time for conversation, no need for complex instruction. The job was universally simple, designed to be learned in an hour, but perfected over a lifetime of repetition. The communication was entirely visual. The slow movement of the chassis, the arrival of the next part on the overhead conveyor, the precise moment a colleague upstream finished his task. Eli tried to distract himself. He calculated how many bolts he secured in an hour, 60, how many in a day, over 500. He began to see the bolts not as separate pieces of metal, but as seconds of his life exchanged for cents of pay. Suddenly, the line stopped. The massive, all-encompassing factory hum died abruptly. The silence was shocking, a massive vacuum where the incessant rhythm had been. Eli blinked, disoriented. He looked down at the half-secured bolt in his hand. Time, which had been governed by the relentless movement of the chassis, returned to the biological pace of his own heart. The workers, released from the machine's spell, coughed, stretched, and muttered amongst themselves. Gus hurried down the line, shouting, "Jam in the engine block department. Everybody stay put. Nobody leaves their station." The stoppage was a rare event, a flaw in the perfect system. For Eli, arrived was a sudden, dizzying dose of freedom. He looked around the vast factory floor, seeing thousands of men, all standing still, all holding their hands over a half-finished task. It was a silent snapshot of a new kind of humanity, men whose identities were tied to the fractional second of a task. A loud, insistent thud came from the far end of the floor. A younger worker, impatient with the stoppage, had kicked a stack of wheel rims. The noise echoed in the massive space, an act of rebellion against the enforced stillness. Then, just as suddenly as it had died, the electric power surged back, the pulleys spun, and the conveyor belt lurched forward. The rhythmic clack, clack, clack of the line resumed, immediately drawing all eyes and hands back into its servitude. Eli barely registered the restart. His hands instinctively finished the bolt, and the next chassis arrived. The stoppage had lasted 4 minutes. 4 minutes of his life, paid for but not controlled by the machine. He had to immediately expel the memory of that freedom, or the rhythm would break him. He focused on the turning of the wrench, allowing the repetitive task to lull his thoughts back into the peaceful, profitable rhythm of the line. The dream of the $5 day demanded this surrender, and Eli, like America itself, was learning the profound new pace of the machine age. 1935. The sky over Oklahoma was not blue. It was a perpetual angry brown. The Dust Bowl had turned the rich prairie soil into a choking nomadic threat, forcing a vast, sorrowful exodus. Yet, across the arid landscape, a ribbon of asphalt and concrete offered a single, clear direction: west. This was Route 66, the legendary Mother Road, carrying the dreams and the despair of a desperate nation. Its sound a persistent, low vibration, the gentle hum of a million slow-moving tires. Our story follows Clara Mae Jenkins, a woman of 30 who had traded her family farm for a battered 1928 Chevy sedan packed with everything they owned: her husband Walter, her 2 small children, and the crushing weight of their lost life. They had sold nearly everything for the gas money, and their destination, like thousands of others, was the promised mythical land of California. Route 66, in the height of the Depression, was a paradoxical place. It was a highway of desperation, yet it also nurtured a burgeoning, fragile economy of hope. The roadside diners, the ramshackle tourist courts, and the struggling independent gas stations. The Jenkins family moved slowly. Their speed was dictated not by the limits of their old engine, but by the need to conserve every drop of fuel and the fear of breaking down in the middle of nowhere. Their journey was not a rush. It was a measured daily commitment to forward motion. "How much further, Pa?" asked 5-year-old Lily from the cramped back seat, her voice muffled by the handkerchief tied over her nose against the dust. "Just keep watching for the next town, girl," Walter replied, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Walter, a farmer by trade, felt stripped of his dignity. On the road, he was just another Okie, a migrant, dependent on the kindness of strangers or the mercy of his outdated machine. Clara, sitting beside him, saw the road not as a path of asphalt, but as a living thing. She watched the endless succession of telegraph poles, their wires humming in the wind, and the relentless, slow passing of other battered cars, their roofs piled high with mattresses and pots, their occupants' faces sharing the same expression of determined weariness. She noticed a phenomenon unique to this road: the roadside mailboxes. Unlike the orderly rows near their farm, these mailboxes were often placed miles from any homestead, waiting for travelers to drop a letter for someone they knew. trusting that another traveller heading east might pick it up and deposit it further down the line. The road was its own communication network, relying on a silent, vast community of migrants. They stopped at a tiny, independent gas station in the middle of the Texas Panhandle. The owner, old Silas, was a man whose skin was as cracked as the baked earth around his pumps. He didn't rush. He filled the tank slowly, checking the tires and radiator as if servicing a friend, not a customer. "Going to California, are ya?" Silas asked, his voice low and sympathetic. Walter, immediately defensive, stiffened. "Just looking for work, mister." "Good, honest work." Silas wiped his hands on a rag. "Ain't no shame in that, son. This road, she don't judge. She takes you where you need to go, but she demands patience. You push her, she'll break you. Take an extra quart of oil on the house. You'll need it for the climb up into New Mexico." The small act of generosity was a moment of grace. Clara accepted the oil with a silent nod, recognizing the quiet bond between those who depended on the road. As they drove west again, the landscape slowly began to change. The endless flat brown of the Dust Bowl gave way to the subtle, slow ascent toward the high plains. The sun began to dip, casting long, peaceful shadows. Clara looked back and saw a line of headlights stretching behind them, all moving with the same careful, measured pace. It wasn't a frantic rush. It was a massive, collective sigh of movement. The sound of their engine, a steady, repetitive thrumming, mixed with the low, gentle hum of the tires on the worn asphalt, was the new lullaby of America. It promised a future, 1 mile at a time, across the great, indifferent spaces of the West. Their lives were stripped bare, but their direction was clear, paved by the silent, enduring hope of the Mother Road. This is an excellent, evocative subtitle for the boring history style, perfectly transitioning from the movement of the road, Route 66, to the static yet vital structures that sustained it. Gas stations and diners allows for a deep dive into the unique, often overlooked architecture and culture of these roadside havens. As with your previous requests, generating the full 6,000-word story in a single response is not feasible due to technical constraints. I will provide a comprehensive structure to meet the length and thematic requirements. An extended opening. Part 1. The first approximately 1,500 words of the story establishing the setting, a small town on an emerging highway, 1948, introducing the main character and setting the theme of the quiet architecture of the open road. A detailed 4-part outline, a structure for the remaining 4,500 words, broken down into specific sections, ensuring the narrative reaches the 6,000-word target while focusing on the symbiotic relationship between the gas station and diner, the post-war boom, and the changing landscape of American travel. The Concrete Veins of America. Chapter 7. Gas stations and diners. The quiet architecture of the open road. 1948. America was back on the move. World War II was over. Rationing was a memory. And the highways, many now freshly paved, were filling with sleek, chrome-heavy automobiles. The national pace was accelerating, but the infrastructure that sustained this speed retained a unique, almost meditative simplicity. This was the era where gas stations and diners became the quiet, essential architecture of the open road. Our story takes place in Harmony Junction, Ohio, where 2 state highways crossed. Here, side by side, sat the Hub Diner and Finley's Filling Station. They were 2 parts of a single economic organism, feeding both the travelers and the machines that carried them. The owner of both was Evelyn Evie Finley, a sharp-witted widow whose husband had started the station before the war and whose cooking skills had built the diner during it. Evie was not just a proprietor, she was a historian of the highway, a quiet observer of the nation's changing habits. Every morning at 5 a.m., Evie was in the diner, setting out the thick ceramic mugs. The diner itself was a marvel of design, a gleaming metal facade with large picture windows and a long, curved counter of formica. Its architecture was designed to be instantly readable by a driver moving at 40 miles per hour. Bright, clean, and inviting. It was an aesthetic of efficiency and immediate comfort. The gas station, right next door, was its less glamorous sibling. It was a simple brick building under a wide protective awning with two imposing, polished gas pumps. Its architecture was one of pure utility, built to shield the product and the attendant from the elements. This morning, the first sound was the distinct whoosh of air brakes as a large, long-haul truck pulled off the highway and coasted into the station. The driver, Pops Callahan, a veteran of the national trucking routes, was Evie's most reliable morning customer. Evie watched as Pops got out, stretching his massive frame. He went straight for the gas pump, not the diner. The ritual was always the same. Machine first, man second. Evie's mechanic, Sam, a laconic young man recently discharged from the army, came out to service the truck. Sam didn't just pump gas, he checked the oil, the tires, and the battery, performing the vital, unseen preventative maintenance that kept the post-war economy moving. Meanwhile, Pops walked into the diner, taking his usual stool at the end of the counter. "Morning, Evie." 2 eggs over easy, bacon crisp, and black coffee strong enough to wake the dead, he requested, settling in with a sigh. "Morning, Pops." "You look like you slept on the back of a freight train," Evie replied, already cracking the eggs onto the griddle. "Just trying to keep up with the new pace, Evie. Highways are getting faster, and the deadlines are getting tighter. Feels like the whole country is running on a timer now." Evie nodded, listening to the rhythmic sizzle of the bacon, the diner's own gentle, dependable sound. The diner served as an emotional and physical reset. It was a place where the traveler could slow down, receive reliable nourishment, and exchange crucial information about road conditions, weather, and traffic jams. Information that was not yet available by radio. The architecture of the diner aided this. The large windows offered a wide view of the highway, keeping the traveler connected to the world they were temporarily escaping. The long counter encouraged conversation between strangers, while the private booths offered quiet refuge. A brand new, gleaming DeSoto sedan pulled up to the pumps. The driver was a family man, a father, a mother in a smart hat, and 2 children, heading out on the first true post-war family road trip. The father immediately demanded high-octane fuel and asked for the restrooms with a tone of impatient urgency. He was a perfect embodiment of the new American rush. Evie observed the contrast. Pops, the professional, understood the road's patience. The family man, the tourist, saw only the destination. Sam serviced the DeSoto quickly, dealing with the impatience with quiet professionalism. As the family sped away, Pops finished his breakfast. "That's the trouble with the new pace, Evie. Nobody stops to notice the concrete anymore. They just drive over it." "And nobody stops to hear the quiet, Pops," Evie replied, wiping down the counter. "But without the quiet, reliable parts, the clean fuel, the hot coffee, the good tires, that new rush wouldn't last 5 hours. The gas station and the diner were not spectacular. They were reliable. They were the constant, patient structures that anchored the speeding country. As Evie watched Sam clean the windshield of another car, she knew that in this small junction they were maintaining not just machines and stomachs, but the very rhythm of the American journey. 1934. The Great Depression had stripped the American landscape bare, leaving not just farms fallow and banks shuttered, but also a generation of young men adrift. In the secluded valleys of western Pennsylvania, where the old timber industry had collapsed, the air was thick with economic stagnation. Here, the arrival of the New Deal's hand, specifically the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, was less a dramatic event and more a quiet, purposeful intrusion of order into chaos. Our protagonist is Leo Thorne, a 19-year-old from Pittsburgh whose engineering dreams had been shelved when his father lost his job. Desperate for structure and income, Leo volunteered for the CCC and was sent to Camp S-88 near the Allegheny National Forest. He was, in essence, traded the endless, hungry idleness of the city for the structured, physical hunger of the wilderness. The CCC camp was a model of temporary functional efficiency. Rows of military-style tents, a mess hall, and a small administrative office. The rhythm of the camp was rigid and reassuring. Reveille at 6 a.m., breakfast, labor, education, and taps at 10 p.m. Leo's project was monumental and symbolic, constructing a sturdy stone arch bridge over the often flooded Black Creek, a vital crossing for the surrounding communities. The existing rickety wooden bridge had failed twice, isolating the farmers on the other side. This new bridge was not just a crossing, it was a physical promise of reliability. On his first morning on the job, Leo met his foreman, Sergeant Hayes, a taciturn man who had traded his army uniform for the CCC's Forester Greens. Hayes pointed to the rushing, muddy Black Creek. "That creek doesn't care about your education, Thorne. It only cares about the strength of your back and the soundness of your stone. We build to last. We build for the next 100 years." Leo, armed with a pickaxe and a wheelbarrow instead of a slide rule, was assigned to the quarry detail. His job was to spend hours splitting raw granite from the hillside, a task of slow, rhythmic violence. Thunk, crack, heave. The sound of the axes and hammers across the hillside was the CCC's anthem, a low, persistent and therapeutic lullaby of collective labor. Leo worked alongside a mix of young men, farm boys who knew the earth, street kids who knew only trouble, and university dropouts like himself. The physical exertion was immediate and relentless, replacing anxiety with bone-deep fatigue. One afternoon, during the slow, careful work of setting the massive keystone for the bridge's main arch, the team struggled to position the rock. It was too heavy, the ropes were slipping, and the men were tiring. Frustration threatened to break the quiet order. Leo, remembering the forgotten geometry of his engineering textbooks, spoke up, his voice hesitant but clear. "Sergeant, if we adjust the fulcrum here and add a second block at this angle, the downward pressure will give us the clean roll we need." Sergeant Hayes paused, looking from the sweating, dirt-caked young man to the massive stone. He didn't dismiss the idea. The CCC was about rehabilitation through purpose, and purpose included using the skills of its recruits. "Show me, Thorne. Show us how to build a better bridge." Leo took charge, directing the placement of the leverage points. With a coordinated collective heave, A slow, unified grunt of effort, the stone slid into place, locking the arch with a satisfying final thud. The arch stood, complete, silent, and immensely strong. The moment was transformative. It wasn't the strength of one man, but the coordinated effort, guided by skill and necessity, that succeeded. The bridge was not just being built with stone and mortar, it was being built with discipline and renewed purpose. Sergeant Hayes nodded slowly, the corners of his mouth barely twitching. That, Thorne, is the New Deal. It's not just the money, it's putting your hands on something that matters and learning to trust the man beside you. Now, let's mix the mortar. We've got 2 more arches by nightfall. As the sun began to set, casting long, peaceful shadows over the construction, Leo looked at the sturdy stone curve he had helped create. It was a beautiful, functional piece of architecture, a quiet promise from the government to the people, built by the patient, meticulous labor of a generation who learned that their own future could be as strong and enduring as the stone they laid. 1941. The world was rushing toward total war, and in a marshy patch of land across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C., a gargantuan structure was rising at a speed that defied all logic. It was not a monument to past glory, but a machine built for efficiency, a 5-sided puzzle of steel and concrete, a tangible symbol of the need for speed that defined America's entry into the global conflict. This was the Pentagon, and its very geometry was its weapon. Our protagonist is Anna Thorne, a young, exceptionally talented cartographer and draftswoman recruited from the University of Virginia's Engineering School. She was brought on by the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps to help manage the dizzying logistical maps for the building's internal layout. Anna was initially drawn by the pure mathematics of the building, the flawless 5-sided symmetry, but soon learned that every line, angle, and hallway was subservient to one master: time. The structure was being built on a relentless 24-hour cycle. The ground itself, reclaimed from an old airfield and a historically protected farm, was unstable, but the speed of construction could not be compromised. The sound of the site was a constant low roar, the clanging of steel, the churning of cement mixers, and the continuous thump-thump of pile drivers forcing foundations into the marshy soil. Anna's office was a massive temporary drafting room filled with hundreds of other engineers, architects, and planners. Her specific task was to map the ring and spoke system, the 5 concentric rings A through E, connected by 10 radial corridors. Every line here is a second saved. Her supervisor, Colonel Ellis, often reminded the team, tapping his ruler against the blueprints. In a war, a second is a life, and a minute is a lost battle. We are building the shortest distance between 2 desks. Anna focused on the central challenge. The Pentagon was designed to allow a person to walk between any 2 points in the entire building in under 7 minutes. This was the ultimate design goal, the geometrical imperative. One afternoon, Anna was finalizing the blueprints for Ring C. A new requirement had come down. The Secretary of War needed to be able to access the Chief of Staff's office, located in Ring E, and the War Plans office, Ring B, in under the 7-minute window, even during high traffic periods. Anna traced the path with her finger, E-Ring office, through a radial corridor into the central courtyard access, across the courtyard's shortest path, and into the B-Ring. The distance was massive, but the unique geometry, The fact that the rings were all connected and a central courtyard existed made the impossible achievable. She noticed a slight flaw in the placement of a planned staircase in a radial corridor. If it were moved just 12 feet to the west, it would shave 18 seconds off the secretary's route by allowing a more direct sightline to the next corridor junction. She brought the change to Colonel Ellis, pointing out the calculation. Ellis didn't praise her engineering, he praised her timing. 18 seconds, Thorne. That's a flash of insight. Get that change to the concrete pour team now. They're running Ring C tomorrow at 0400. The speed of decision-making was as frantic as the speed of construction. Anna watched the entire process move from her pencil to the construction site in less than 6 hours. The building was a self-correcting machine, its geometric form evolving minute by minute to maximize efficiency. As she left the drafting office near midnight, the floodlights bathed the immense skeleton of the Pentagon in a harsh electric glare. It was beautiful in its brutal, functional symmetry. The 5 sides, originally chosen to avoid interfering with a nearby military road and a national cemetery, had, through the pressure of war, become the ideal shape for a fast, centralized command center. Anna stood by the water's edge, watching the Potomac flow silently past. The war raged overseas, but its urgency was being concretized right here, in the cold mathematics of the Pentagon's design. The building was not a luxury. It was a tool, built with a silent, desperate need to outthink, outplan, and outspeed the enemy. The war's anxiety was literally being built into the walls of the world's most efficient office building. 1956. The signing of the Federal Aid Highway Act was not a celebration of asphalt. It was an act of Cold War strategy disguised as infrastructure. President Dwight D. Eisenhower, the former Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe, saw the chaos of America's existing roads not merely as an inconvenience, but as a fatal vulnerability. The vast network of state roads was slow, inefficient, and utterly incapable of handling a national evacuation or the rapid transport of military assets. The nation needed speed, and speed demanded a new, standardized geometric machine, the interstate highway system. This was Eisenhower's grand vision, a $25 billion, 41,000-mile network that would fundamentally redraw the map of America. Our protagonist is Dr. Elias Vance, a civil engineer brought in from the Bureau of Public Roads to oversee the critical early planning and standardization. Dr. Vance was a quiet man, deeply meticulous, who understood that the future of the nation rested on the depth of the concrete and the precision of the curve. He viewed the entire system as a single, massive piece of engineering designed to operate at a state of perpetual, high-speed efficiency. Dr. Vance's office was a small, temporary barracks near the construction site of the future Department of Transportation headquarters in Washington, D.C. The walls were covered in maps that showed every state's existing roads overlaid with the proposed perfectly straight and often controversially drawn lines of the new interstates. His immediate, most profound challenge was standardization. Every highway from California to Maine had to operate on the same rigid set of rules. This was the quiet, necessary violence of the system, eliminating local variation for national uniformity. One afternoon, Dr. Vance was reviewing the blueprints for Interstate 70 crossing into Pennsylvania, a crucial east-west artery. The Pennsylvania Highway Department had submitted plans for an on-ramp curve that was too tight by federal standards. "Look here, gentlemen," Dr. Vance said, tapping his ruler on the blueprint. "The current state design requires a driver traveling at the national speed limit, 70 miles per hour, soon to be standard, to slow down to 35 miles per hour to safely take this curve. That is unacceptable." A state engineer, Mr. Peterson, countered, "But doctor, that curve saves us 2 acres of land acquisition and bypasses a small cemetery. It's the most efficient local route." Dr. Vance shook his head. "Efficiency is measured on the national scale, Mr. Peterson. This system is a defense asset. That sudden slowdown creates a bottleneck. If this road is ever needed to move tanks or evacuate a city, that bottleneck becomes a disaster. The curve must be widened to accommodate a sustained speed of 55 miles per hour, even if the exit speed is lower. We are designing for the worst possible scenario. The engineering was dictated by military specifications. The interstate had to be designed not only for rapid civilian travel, but also for the heavy weight of military convoys, the clearance needed for missile transporters, and, critically, segments had to be straight and flat enough to serve as auxiliary airstrips for military aircraft in the event of an attack. Dr. Vance looked at the map. The sheer scope was daunting. Cutting through cities, climbing mountains, bridging rivers. It was a war waged against the existing landscape. The sound of his office was the low scratch of pencils, the rustle of paper, and the continuous electric hum of the air conditioner. A sound of quiet, determined calculation. He understood the core genius of Eisenhower's vision. The old general, remembering the slow, inefficient troop movements across Germany's poor roads, had been deeply impressed by the German Autobahn. Eisenhower knew that to win the next global conflict, the American military needed the ability to deploy resources instantly, and the civilian population needed to escape safely. The interstate system was the ultimate tool for both. As Dr. Vance approved the updated I-70 curve, he felt a profound, quiet weight. He was not just drawing a road, he was drawing a line of defense, a line of commerce, and a line of guaranteed speed across the continent. The work was demanding, invisible, and essential. The silent, meticulous birth of the single greatest piece of infrastructure in American history.